The race is on to leverage the power of artificial intelligence. But the best algorithms in the world won't work without quality data. That's why smart organizations are getting their data house in order. Learn more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the show. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, and I'm so excited to talk about one of the hottest topics in the industry today, folks, Agentic AI. We're going to talk about getting prepared, future-proofing your data for Agentic AI. One of my favorite ways to describe it is get your data house in order. AI is extremely powerful, but it needs data to perform efficiently. It needs good quality data, and it needs a lot of good quality data. So whether you're training a model yourself or building out a RAG model, for example, or a graph RAG, which I think is some pretty interesting stuff. However it is that you're going to leverage AI, it wants data. It wants high quality, good, trusted, certified data. That is going to be the topic of our discussion today and our show, Future Proof Your Data for Agentic AI. And what an all-star cast, folks, we have here. I'm going to go around the room and introduce our friends. First, Manny Gill, fairly new to Boomi, former SAP, former Microsoft. Excited to be hitting the ground running. Boomi World, of course, is next week in Dallas. If you're able to come to that, come to that. But Manny, welcome to the show. Tell us real quick a bit about yourself and what you're excited about with Boomi.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Eric, and great to be here. Um, I work on the product team. I look after data and AI. I think of data as kind of the AI as the tip of the spear, and data definitely the wood behind that arrow. So we need to get the data right,
Ooh.
data in a way that we can use in our AI projects.
I love that analogy. I'm going to steal that one for sure. Data is the wood behind the arrow. That is pretty cool stuff. Ariel Pohoryles, you also are relatively new, not super new, but came from the Rivery side, now part of Boomi. What are you excited about as Boomi World approaches?
Yeah, lots. Hi everyone, nice to be here. Yeah, as you mentioned, they joined Boomi recently as part of the acquisition of Rivery. As you know, the Rivery world was mostly around the data pipelines. Now with Boomi, it's really expanding quite a bit to feeding, as Manny mentioned, not just the targets, but actually other workflows such as agentic AI workflows. So really excited about some of the announcement that they will be sharing next week.
Yeah, I've been tracking enterprise software, I'm afraid to admit for how long? 35 years. Yeah, it's been about 35 years. I've been watching this stuff and I've never seen a pace of innovation like we're seeing right now today. I mean, and I kind of predicted this late last year. I said we're about to enter, or we are entering a period of hyper accelerated innovation. And boy, that has not been untrue as we see all these things, agentic in particular. And last but not least, Jason Proto from RSM, the fifth largest accounting firm. You've heard about the big four. They're number five. So welcome to the show. Dialing in from Cincinnati, baby, in the Rust Belt. Tell us about yourself and what you're excited about.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having us here. So I'm a principal at RSM, and my team partners with Boomi and Rivery to do data pipelines and integrations. And we are helping our clients in the middle market, which is where we kind of sit, clients between about 100 million in revenue all the way up to 5 billion, on their AI journeys and setting up their data so that they can get the best analysis and models and insights from their data to help them run their businesses. So real excited to be here on this show today.
Well, and let's get right to it, folks. So, for some history, DM Radio is now in its 18th year, so we've been doing this a pretty long time. And I remember, and Manny, I'll throw this first one over at you. I remember back as far back as 2008 and 2009, and I had really gotten into the BI industry back in '01. So business intelligence, data warehousing, ETL. I kind of understood the whole concept and the basic tenets, if you will, of data warehousing and the value. And early in the game, I thought to myself, this ETL going around and around and around and around, like someone has got to stop this madness or at least be able to orchestrate things better. Now, I can't say I used that word, but I'll use it today in context because I realized that there's so much data movement going on. Of course, what happens is people figured out, hey, this data warehouse is pretty cool. I want to get my data in there as well. So now you're hitting batch window after batch window, and it used to be overnight. Then it was all day long, 24/7 batch windows loading data in. There has to be a better way. Of course, there was data virtualization. ELT came along, extract, load, transform, load it into the cloud, for example. But data orchestration, to me, really does represent a significant maturation of this industry. So, from your perspective, how big a deal is data orchestration for AI, for fueling AI initiatives?
Yeah, great question, Eric. And you brought me back to my BI days as well. I started my career as an engineer at Crystal, if you remember a product called
Oh
Crystal
my
Reports.
goodness, I sure
Yeah.
do.
And went on a journey, Crystal Reports to business objects to SAP, delivering business intelligence as well as what we called enterprise information management. So everything from data governance to ETL to master data management solutions. The the way I see it today, and at Boomi, we will be announcing the release of our what we're calling the Agent Studio, which allows you to design, govern, and orchestrate agents, right? And so your question is around orchestration around data, and I think that while business intelligence, required an individual operations person or a business user to get access to data. In this case, we're really talking about agents, and the types of data that they need is, goes from, hey, what's the answer, the question that I need to answer, to the context that I need. And
Mm,
so in this context, orchestration becomes even more important, but it also becomes focused, right? Whereas in the analytics world, hey, let's set up this, a nice data warehouse that has all the tables, is cleansed, et cetera, it's got the right schemas. Where from an orchestration perspective, we need to focus on is getting the right data pipeline. So whether it's, hey, we've got to bring these sources together and allow the agents to be able to get context to that data, or it's, hey, we've got these prompts and then we've got to store that as memory so that the agents can continuously learn and get better and provide value to customers. So I think the orchestration question just changes, but it becomes very much more focused on the problem that we're trying to solve with the agents.
right. And, obviously, we've wanted to leverage data for years now. That's nothing new. But I think the reminder I keep throwing out to our audience is to recognize, look, this AI stuff, it is very powerful. Of course, Gen AI is taking the world by storm. It's very powerful, but don't think that all the other practices of yesteryear go out the window. No, in fact, they're more important now, I'd say, than ever. Right? Right, Manny?
Yeah, totally. We tend to think of them as deterministic processes versus probabilistic, and they're both important, right? And I also look at the agentic world as just adding a layer on top where we can automate things more. We can, make some of the stuff that we're trying to do more efficient, but we're still trying to make decisions with analytic data, trying to run our businesses, make them more efficient. So I definitely, I used this analogy the other day, or at least I thought about this, which was, hey, we were in a position where we were digitally transforming our environments in the early 2000s, right? But then this unfortunate event happened called COVID, and it was a moment in time, right, that forced us essentially to accelerate these projects, right? And I feel like AI is a catalyst for that as it specifically relates to data. We have the data, and we always say, hey, it could be clean, it could be better organized. And now I believe the agentic kind of opportunity is a catalyst to accelerate that.
Right. And acceleration is exactly what we're seeing out there. But again, might want to tap the brakes a little bit, folks. Just make sure you're ready to go down that road. That's what we're talking about, future proofing your data. And Jason, I'll throw this one, or actually, Ariel, I'll bring you into the conversation now. Data orchestration again, it's encompassing all these methods. We have ETL, we have ELT, we have data virtualization, master data management. All of that fits within the realm of data orchestration. What are your thoughts about how this should serve as a call to action for data engineers, for data managers, for CDOs to prepare for agentic AI, all of our traditional workflows? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, you talked about the pace of innovation earlier in the conversation. It's the shift from ETL to ELT was a huge shift, but now
Right. That's right.
now we keep on accelerating. You mentioned different modes as data streaming as well that you didn't mention. That is another kind of mode that needs to be handled. Essentially, what we see is, I think, in the modern data workflows, and advancement in the way we can set up our data pipelines and orchestrate processes. But at the same time, much more complexity around those data pipelines. They involve many more data sources, different data types. They involve different data volumes, often much larger than before, as well as different refresh rates that we need to incorporate. So all of that really increases the importance of orchestration. The way we handle that complexity is by throwing a lot of capabilities and solutions which are easier to use, but there are really different components that comes together as part of the data pipeline. And so being able to stitch them together or glue those processes together with the right orchestration mechanism is critical. And I think the other part that is as important, and agentic AI, as Manny mentioned, is part of it, is really trying to help us automate processes. And so how we activate data, either whether using reverse ETL or really operationalizing it with AI agents that are able to take decisions for us. Again, this is something that orchestration needs to handle. And so for me, what's important when we think about those modern data workflows and how orchestration plays in that is really the ability to not just create the dependency management and ensure the workflows and activities are following each other, but also being able to oversee them and have the connectivity from an observability or a management perspective as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up reverse ETL. One of the cool ways I've heard to describe that is hydrating your applications. I mean, we spend all this time and money pulling data from operational systems into the warehouse to certify it, to cleanse it, to get it pristine for use with analysis and decision making. And if you hydrate your applications with all that cleansed data, now you've moved the value out to that whole application landscape, right?
Exactly, and I think that's something that Boomi has been doing for years with the iPaaS approach that was quite innovative when Boomi started. But then the complexity around the way that data needs to be treated before it's being activated and hydrating by the operational systems increased, and that's where again the orchestration comes into play, where you're now able to maybe do so across multiple systems at once, and then synchronize all those applications together and make sure that you have maybe the right data quality rules in between, and ensuring data consistency that way.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'll throw this question over to Jason, Proto of RSM. This all sounds great, but guess what? There are always bottlenecks. There are always gotchas, and a lot of that stuff, to be candid, over the years we've kind of swept under the rug and just moved on and gone with something that did work. There wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to tying all the loose ends. I guess what I'm trying to say. We've kind of swept a lot of stuff under the rug and pretended that's not a problem. It is a problem, and we have to fix that now, I think, as best we can as we leapfrog into this next age. What's your take on common bottlenecks? Where do you see the problems when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, I think we can break it up into two different areas. So one is really in the infrastructure itself. That includes things like access to applications to onboard the data into whatever your data repositories that are being used for AI. It could be security protocols, like maybe you have PII on some of the columns of data in your databases that you're looking at. So what are the protocols to kind of mask those things? And then what about latency issues? Even with an iPaaS solution, do you have the right bandwidth to be able to bring on more data? So you really need to think about the infrastructure and the way that you're orchestrating all of these data pipelines when you're building them out and how scalable they are. And then the second part that we want to look at is really the data itself, right? Do you have a data governance program? Are you bringing in bad data? Because let's say you have really good models that are tested and they're meeting all of your expectations, and they're risk averse and all of those kinds of things. And then you onboard a new system or you bring a new data set in, and now all of a sudden you're skewing your data, right? And maybe you're getting drift, maybe you're getting bad language models, duplication, those kinds of things. So one of the bottlenecks is that now you have to stop that agent from working and you have to go back and retune or clean up that data. And so that kind of like stops the flow and usability of the data that you're putting into your AI agents or your other AI models. One place that we really see this is in the private equity space, because when you're doing mergers and acquisitions, a lot of times you're either onboarding a lot of new data sets or you're bringing in new applications. So you have all of these things that you have to worry about. So you really have to think about, do you have a plan to overcome all of these bottlenecks? And are you doing things like benchmark testing of your current pipelines? And with Boomi and Rivery, we're able to set up some of the guardrails and the visibility into that to make sure that as we scale, we're able to kind of uncork those bottlenecks.
Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, with an all-star cast from Boomi and RSM. We're all getting ready to head down to Dallas for the big Boomi World. I love Boomi World. We went there last year. I've gone to several of these shows. They're always very, very interesting. And I have to say, Boomi and Steve Lucas and the whole team, they have the right idea. It was like almost 2 years ago, like I think it's just a year, like 20 months ago, I ran into Steve Lucas at a hallway at one of these things, and I said, everyone's excited about Gen AI. What I'm more excited about is what I called interactive AI back then. And then some clever person came up with agentic AI. I'm like, yeah, that's the word. Interactive is a bit too bulky. It is agentic AI. And Boomi is focused squarely on building this out, a control tower, and really understanding how these agents work. But again, data. The data is important. So let's dive right back in here. And, and I'll throw this one maybe over to Jason first, and then Manny, if you want to comment on it. The modern data stack. Now, I am a huge fan of technology. I geek out all the time on the new tools. I love it. When the modern data stack came out, I was like, that's great. And it was great because now you have it's like this battle between best of breed and then platform, right? And best of breed comes along when the old ways of doing things are not quite as sharp as you want. And then eventually it all gets baked into a new platform. And there are benefits of going that route. But the modern data stack, I mean, geez, Louise, the amount of complexity that this brings into the equation, as you start to scale, that starts to cause some real issues. And that's when you start wondering, maybe we do want to consolidate a lot of these efforts. So we have the single pane of glass so we can see and orchestrate and govern. It's very hard to govern when you have multiple tools and multiple technologies and multiple access points. If you have one environment where you're doing these things, it's a lot easier to govern. But Jason, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks. To go back in the way back machine a little bit, I came from IT management. I started my career before consulting in IT management, and IT overhead is a problem, with every organization. And anytime you're adding organizational overhead and IT overhead, you're adding risk. It could be performance, it could be efficiency, it could be security risks when you're adding all of these systems in. So a unified platform is really going to cut down on the amount of overhead and allow IT organizations to kind of create better visibility into the data movement. Because like you said, you're going to that one pane of glass, you're going to that one application, you're going to the one iPaaS solution, and everything is there and all of the coordination there. And if something is maybe going wrong or you're seeing bad performance, it could be like linked together, and you're going to be much better in the way that you can kind of block and tackle for things that are happening in your organization. We find that, especially at clients in the middle market, they have very lean IT organizations, which means you have to find every way possible to be, more efficient in the ways that you're doing things. So, if you only have 2 or 3 people on your team that are doing all of your kind of like data ETL, data manipulation, data visualizations, those kinds of things, you really need to think about, how can I make their job easier and make it better for them and lessen those risks. So that's like one of the benefits of, Rivery joining up with Boomi, because now you have not only the data pipelines, but you have the API management, you have Data Hub, you have all of these things. I'm sure Manny can probably expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, Manny, go ahead.
I'll pick it up there. I think absolutely. I think I think of unified platform. I also think open platform is just as important in that context. But you mentioned Steve, our CEO, 2 years ago. He saw this agentic future coming down the pipe. I think he was actually quoted first in the press using that terminology of agents. But the that vision kind of led to an expansion of the Boomi capabilities, which started with iPaaS, and then on the platform we added a much richer data management capability, and that led to the acquisition of Rivery for analytic use cases, plus big data use cases around agentic, but also API management. And now, if you think about it, APIs are kind of the energy that's feeding agents today, and being front-ended with MCP is a very popular protocol these days. But essentially, it's APIs behind the MCP protocol. And then obviously AI management, right? And so having all of these capabilities on a single platform provides value. And one word that, Eric, I'm sure you is near and dear to you is lineage. And so
Hmm.
imagine lineage, not just from the data perspective, but all the way to the agentic layer. And so how do you govern that? How do you understand what is this agent actually doing? Why did it make this decision? How do you audit that, right? And where did it get its data from? And that user context, that delegated authorization across. So not to say you couldn't do it with different platforms and stitching them together, but this workflow just becomes more and more complex. However, you need an open platform so that, our control tower for agents, it supports any agent that you've built, whether it's in Salesforce or it's in Boomi or in AWS Bedrock as an example. And so now you have a single control plane, a single pane of glass where you can monitor the observability plus what's running in your environment, so you understand what the agents are doing, and where the data is coming from and how they're making their decisions, et cetera. So it definitely becomes important as the systems become more complex.
Yeah. Well, and also there's a timeliness aspect to this as well, right? I mean, we keep moving closer and closer to real time, as we've talked about. I mean, for context, the first article I ever wrote in this industry was in 2003 for a magazine called DM Review, and it was all about real-time data warehousing. Well, there wasn't a lot of real-time data warehousing back in 2003, but there's a lot of it today. And Manny, I'll throw this back over to you. These agents, they want real-time data. If you want to succeed in leveraging these amazing little creatures, you want them to get certified, trusted data, and you want it as fast as possible so that they understand the context right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think to some degree there's that same balance that we had back in 2003, right? Where, hey, we needed historical information to do kind of trend analysis, et cetera. That still exists. But a lot of the use cases, as you mentioned, these agents are operationalizing, automating our business. And so they do need access to timely data. So, I think of things like traditional things that we've delivered with machine learning, like supplier risk. Now with agents having real-time access to the news and the way the world is changing. So, use that ugly or most beautiful word in the dictionary starts with a capital T, but how that's influencing supply chains as an example, right? And what suppliers we choose as we're fulfilling orders and stuff. And so, that's agentic workflows. Those are agents that are replacing those workflows. So having access to timely data in real time is not just nice to have, but it's a core part of the scenario for sure.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with you. And there are market forces that are changing what we do. And now there's AI and agentic AI, and you just know that it is a driver. I mean, it's it's dominating conversations in boardrooms right now. But again, I caution folks that data is really, really important. And maybe Ariel, I'll throw this one over to you. Simplification is what we want, right? Complexity can be good for a while as you're trying out new things, as you're getting closer to the bleeding edge. But as soon as possible, you want to simplify what your systems are doing, what your people are doing. You don't want over complexity, because that kind of it becomes its own sort of form of technical burden. That's another interesting concept Donald Farmer wrote about just the other day. There's technical debt and technical burden. And there are different things, right? A debt has to be paid, burden has to be endured. And complexity is a technical burden, right, Ariel?
Oh, yeah, exactly. I think that connects very nicely what Jason mentioned earlier around kind of the lean teams and being able to support that. It's really, at the end of the day, it's not always very easy to show ROI with data and even with AI. Even though there's some amazing use cases out there, you really have to find the right use case that drives kind of the return on the investment. And so if that's so complex to achieve and that's so hard to maintain, obviously the investment cost goes up, and it's much harder to prove the value of it. So keeping things as simple as possible, and of course, there's different ways to achieve simplicity, but being able to still solve the complex use cases. I think that's what we try to do as a product vendor. That's a part of our value proposition. That was the case for us at Rivery before Boomi acquired us, but that aligned very nicely with kind of Boomi's values. And I think we've seen that over the years with data engineers turning to us and saying, yes, I can technically build, for example, my data pipeline using open source libraries for a certain process. We talked about real-time data being fed into those agentic AI workflows, or even into AI models. It's a limit of how much data you can actually push into those AI models, even though the recent models are quite impressive in terms of the amount of data points it can actually gather. Still, that there's limits to that. And so you really need to be efficient about the way data is being extracted and pulled into the system. That's why we invested quite a bit in a CDC engine that enables pulling just incremental data sets from the data source, introducing very little operational burden on that data source, and then pushing that very efficiently into the target, which could be an AI model, for example, and then using that for whatever workflow that may be. So that type of motion, if you don't simplify it enough, you just won't do it, because the pipeline won't be reliable. It'll just break, and the whole solution falls apart. So that's why we invest quite a bit in that area of really getting to the point where our data pipelines are fully automated from the point of view of infrastructure management, or lack of need to manage infrastructure, as well as to the point of being able to automatically adapt as data changes. So we know schema evolves over time. We know that we need to be able to also make sure that the data accuracy stays always intact with a process that may break in the middle of the data pipeline. So as you resume the next time you run your data pipelines, how do you make sure that the full data set moved on without duplication? So all those things are things that we really emphasize when we think about how we simplify data pipelines and the whole kind of value chain of data development for our users.